To mark the beginning of his new term, Vladimir Putin chose Beijing as his first destination. In a joint statement, the two sides agreed to deepen their strategic partnership. Their meeting is Putin and Xi's fourth time speaking face-to-face since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Now, at this point, what does a deepening Putin and Xi partnership imply, and how concerned should the world be? For more insights on the China-Russia summit, we now connect with Professor Byung-joo of the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good morning, Professor Kim.
Good morning.
Hope you had a decent weekend.
I did. Thank you very much.
All right. Now that we're all rested, we're ready to get caught up. First and foremost, to understand the alliance, what can we say about China's significance to Russia?
Over 2 years ago, when Ukraine invasion by Russia started, soon after that, I do remember, and I hope our listeners may recall, that what happened at that time. Soon after the invasion, the predominant prediction or expectation was that Russia was not going to continue on very long, and there were even some expectations that Russia will be defeated. Russian victory or strength of Russia was not expected. Initially, Russia kind of like invaded different parts of Ukraine, but they were soon pushed back. And at the time, early stage of the war, the expectation was that Russia was going to be eventually defeated. Now, the situation has turned out to be opposite after time longer than 2 years now. Russia is strong, and Ukraine is on defensive right at this point. What made this possible? A lot of people believe that this was made possible not by Russia's own, what it's got on its own, but rather help or cooperation from the major powers such as China and India and some from Iran as well. What we mean by that is, clearly, when people were expecting Russia's eventual defeat at the Ukraine invasion, was because the Western world had efficient means to block Russia and, limit Russia. And the tools were two things. One was blocking Russia's settlement of using U.S. dollars. So whatever U.S. dollar Russia has, they could not use. And Russia could be blockaded for their oil exports. So if Russian economy is such a heavily oil-dependent economy, and if they cannot sell things and then get paid in dollars, that's it. That's pretty much end of the story. And moreover, some of our listeners may be surprised to hear this, but I do remember the data at that time. At the time of Ukraine invasion, GDP of Russia was close to or smaller than South Korea's. So, Russia to begin with didn't have much in terms of economic side of it, and then they faced the blockade of oil exports, and then also, the kind of blocking of U.S. dollar use. So there's no future for Russia. But as I said, China came to rescue, and China began buying Russian oil big time and paying back, with yuan and even, Russian currency, ruble, and so on. So China saved Russia, basically, in this Ukraine war. And that's how important China is. And in seeing Putin running to Beijing immediately after renewal his term, and, getting so close, going buddy-buddy with Xi Jinping, it just showed us how extensive this is. And this time he brought, with some exaggeration, entire cabinet, and then everybody.
A decorated delegation, right?
Yeah, all the big names in the Russian, economy, like energy, chemical industry, aerospace, all the big names of Russian economy, they went along with him. So that it's how important China is to Russia. The picture was made very clear this time.
Right, right. It was also a chance for the Russian president to prove that he does, in fact, have a powerful ally. I've never seen Xi Jinping reach out for a hug.
Yeah, I think that was a good observation. Right, right. Xi Jinping never hugs, rather than
I don't think he's a
Putin.
hugger. No one pins him for a hugger, but
No.
there was definitely that moment. Both leaders ties off. Xi Jinping seen reaching for a hug with Vladimir Putin. All right, let's take a
Right,
look at,
right.
of course, the other side of the conversation. We understand why Russia needs China. The other interest might be, why does China need Russia, right? Beijing and Moscow
Mhm.
pledged this so-called new era together. It seems to heavily imply probably countering the United States. So to what extent can we say it is the US, in fact, that makes China take Russia's side?
For China, it's very tricky balancing act that they are engaged in here because initially, 2 years ago, when Russia invaded, it was clear that Russia was the invader, and China was very careful not to take side with Russia, up front.
Uh-huh.
Actually, it was very careful about it, trying to keep the balance and everything. And even to this day, it's interesting when I say balancing act. All these things, words came out. For instance, the joint statement by Russia and China that was issued in Beijing this time.
Mhm.
There were strong words against the United States. But the thing is, Xi Jinping himself, and after the event, media coverage by the Chinese national media and so on, they were very careful about not criticizing the U.S. So we see like totally two different faces
Mhm.
of China trying to do this. And we do understand basically China needs a friend. And even though I don't know how many of our listeners would say, yes, actually, China, it makes sense that China support Russia, the invader of sovereign country, Ukraine, and all that.
Mm.
But strategically, kind of, it makes good sense. Overall, the joint statement says uh, they oppose, Russia and China strongly oppose the United States' efforts to maintain US's military supremacy. And all these actions done by United States, such as setting up AUKUS, the
Uh-huh.
military alliance, right? We talked about this in this program, and advanced kind of air defense system and extremely high precision, very high level of precision nuclear weapons development and then sharing of nuclear weapons with NATO allies and so on, they strongly, strongly oppose.
Mm.
And Not only Europe, but in Pacific area, the United States is working on setting up those kind of alliances. As I mentioned in the case of AUKUS, they're very much against the overall idea of the United States forming these kind of alliances against China. So they made it quite very, very clear there.
Mm.
But however, though China, as I said, in their post coverage
Mhm.
of the summit, it was very interesting to note that China's national media was not saying anything really strongly against the United States. So,
Ah.
so there is that dilemma on the
Mm.
side of China we could see.
All right. As you alluded to earlier, Professor Kim, as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned, the U.S. continues to allege the Chinese support of Russia has made Western sanctions obsolete against Moscow's economy and defense, which, of course, Beijing vehemently denies. At this seemingly critical juncture, what can we note in the Xi-Putin discussion, specifically on Ukraine?
It was interesting. We knew this was coming, and this has been mentioned before, but this time it was extensively, discussed.
Right.
What we mean by that is what they called Xi Jinping and Putin called the political and diplomatic resolution of the situation. So
Mm-mm.
overall, kind of on its strength on the side of Putin. Russia is doing better in Ukraine, and so they're on the stronger side now. And then maybe it makes good sense to seek an exit on its strength rather than on defensive. So
Mm.
it makes good sense that Putin was talking about political or diplomatic solution, and Xi Jinping was very much supporting. And then Xi Jinping probably thought it makes look China good, seeking exit and ending of the overall situation. And overall,
Right.
ending of Ukraine situation is probably what overall all countries around the world probably want, right?
How we get there, we might have an entirely different approach.
Yeah, exactly. And at this time, after
Mm,
all these years of sacrifices and all this, cost that went in,
mm,
we don't know of that many countries. They're saying total rollback is necessary. All Russian forces needs to be kicked out of the old border
mm,
of Ukraine and so on.
mm,
In principle, that makes good sense, but however, practical sense, I don't think many countries actually around the world support that idea at the moment,
mm,
and countries around the world actually want the end of the situation as quickly as possible. So,
mm,
what Xi Jinping and Putin discussed in Beijing and talked about in Beijing this time kind of makes sense and probably has certain support outside.
mm.
Setting that aside, however, they were actually indeed talking a lot in very different, very interesting words like with balance, effective, and sustainable solution of the situation.
Mm.
They're supporting it, putting themselves on the more of like peace side of the overall picture. It's kind of ironic that Xi Jinping and Putin were putting themselves on the
Peaceful, huh? Uh-huh.
peaceful
After
resolution
the war.
after the war, right? After all this loss of lives and so on. But still, it was an interesting gesture on their side. And one of the interesting thing is, in addition to these words for supporting a political and diplomatic solution to Ukraine situation, they were saying that actually we are representing the global South. I don't remember many occasions in the past where actually Putin and Xi Jinping were talking extensively about global South, meaning
Mm.
this division of the world where West, United States, and Europe stand on the other side, global
Right.
North, and the developing countries and all others on the other side. And Putin and Xi Jinping claiming kind of like they're the leaders of global South more explicitly.
Right.
I thought it was quite interesting because it brings me back all the memories, even when Russia used to be part of G8,
Mm,
you know.
mm, mm.
I don't know if you remember that time. I'm sure you do,
I,
but
briefly.
Russia used to be part of
Yeah,
G8,
yes, yes.
right? They got kicked out
Yeah.
after Crimea invasion and so on. So China aspired to be part of West, 1990s and 2000 and so on. So, but
Mm.
this time in Beijing, we saw those words coming out of their mouth. So that was kind of interesting and reflecting the changes, I suppose.
All right. So, what might it imply for this envisioned new world order that is not led by the United States? We'll wait and see. We also wanted to pick your brain on, of course, the issue of Pyongyang. How do we evaluate what Xi and Putin had to say about North Korea?
Again, no surprise on this side, but however, observers agreed that they notice this explicit mentioning of North Korea in Xi Putin's joint statement because they didn't exactly have to, but they explicitly mentioned that China and Russia, they are against the efforts to blockade North Korea.
Mm,
Several years ago, the whole world and United Nations Security Council, they
mm,
were opposing North Korea's nuclear, weapons acquisition,
mm,
and the whole world was against that. But now, clearly, Russia and China stated that sanctions on North Korea is something that they oppose. So this is a clear statement of the change of the situation overall.
mm,
And when we talk about the rise of a new Cold War, there can't be anything stronger and more explicit statement on this one, other than this time the two leaders, Xi Jinping and Putin, saying they are against sanctions against North Korea. So
mm,
that's a huge step.
mm,
Uh, in the other direction,
mm,
the direction that the world has been pursuing for decades with regard to North Korea's nuclearization.
mm,
This is a huge step in the opposite direction. So that's something noted. Clearly, no, North Korea is no longer a pariah state that's being sanctioned by world and major powers, but
mm,
two of the world major powers, actually Russia
mm,
and China, have chosen to support North Korea.
mm.
And this clearly reminds us that this is a new world we live in.
There were supposed to be two pariahs, Russia since the invasion of Ukraine and North Korea, of course, keeping up with the UNSC Council resolutions. But it seems that those narratives are quickly shifting, especially with this recent summit in Beijing. Now, the big question, of course, we've been asking, it feels maybe in hushed reverent tones for months and months, is what are South Korea's options in dealing with clearly the rising North Korea, China, Russia nexus? And we're likely looking at a trilateral Seoul, Tokyo, Beijing summit towards the end of this month. Could that be addressed at the upcoming summit?
Yeah. Seoul, Beijing, Tokyo trilateral summit is something that's important, right?
Right.
Because it's something that counters kind of what do you call it, balancing act, the overall situation. We agree that the mainstream is the rise of the new Cold War line being drawn, China, Russia, North Korea on one side, as we've been mentioning, and the United States, Japan, and Korea on the other side. But this trilateral gathering of China, Korea, Japan, it's something that we need as an antidote for kind of slowing down, if you will, of this rise of new Cold War and so on. So a lot is, kind of being a lot is at stake at this time in terms of successful gathering of this trilateral gathering. Even though the head of China, the China will be, represented by its prime minister rather than President Xi. So that's a little bit downside, but still, it's an important opening, and many eyes are watching at this point. And so Korea is in a situation where it really has to calculate its interest very hard. And I just want to end today's discussion with a note. Without criticizing anyone here, without taking any political stance here, I just want to point out that South Korea here, we need a lot of thinking together here, because a few days ago, memoir by President Moon Jae-in came out about his diplomacy and foreign relations. And we were again reminded of vast gulf that exists between the two schools of thinking inside South Korea. One group that has been represented by President Moon and his group, and then the other one that's represented by current President Yoon and his group. And I'm thinking, the serious consideration of both sides of the argument is needed, and we have to be able to pick and choose the right kinds of arguments from each side to the extent possible. I think many of us are kind of tempted to say, well, the other side is totally wrong, and this side is totally right.
That's the easy way out.
Yeah, that's a really easy way out in terms of our brain thinking, that's totally nonsense, and what I believe is right. But the thing is, I think really, I've been talking about centralist position all the time, but I think there are certain points that are important, probably on both sides, and we as a people, the public in Korea, need to closely examine the merits and demerits of this dispute on each side, and then try to come up with better solutions at this point, rather than just bickering and shouting back to the other side.
And as, I guess, an educated member of the public, it is us also who must keep the government accountable. So be smart and not lazy.
Yep. There we go.
And if you're exhausted, don't worry. Join us every Monday, and Professor Kim will get you all caught up. Thank you very much. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.